Hi, I'm Dr. Frank Anthony Thomas, and I am presenting to you another version of the African American Preaching Legacy series, where we strive to bring the best of African American preaching to you. So today we have the Dr. Elaine Flake as our special guest, the retired pastor of Greater Allen A.M.E. Church.
That's right.
In New York. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
We've been looking forward to having you for a little while.
Good. I'm glad to be here.
So let's start with, tell me about where you grew up. Lead me to your call. Give me some history here.
Okay, so I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, at the St. Jude Missionary Baptist Church. And I was a staunch little church girl from the beginning. I was in the Sunday school, went to church on Sunday in the choir, went to Baptist Training Union. Now, some of that was social. It was not all spiritual, but that's, my life was really in the church. And of course, I never saw a female preacher the entire time that I was in, until I went off to college. But what would happen as I grew older, being from Memphis, we would leave Baptist Training Union and go down to Pentecostal Temple, Church of God in Christ. Okay. And that it was there that I saw women who were not ordained necessarily. They would call them evangelists. But those women, when you gave them the mic, would just turn the church inside out. And so there was like, wow, okay. I had never seen it and never really thought of them as being preachers, but was always fascinated with their spiritual power, their ability to articulate, their ability to rock a church. And so that was kind of my beginning with female preachers. So when I went to Fisk in the 60s, there was a militant time, and I was, one who was really caught up in the movement at that time. I didn't do much church those 4 years that I was at Fisk. When I came home in the summer, of course, I went to St. Jude. But upon my graduation, I went to Boston University, and I stayed there after I completed the master's program and taught in Newton, Massachusetts for a while. But I also found my way to St. Paul A.M.E. Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts. John Bryant was the pastor. His wife, Cecilia, was my first lady. And it was there that I first saw an ordained, seminary-trained Reverend Nurjan Govan preach. It was earth-shattering to me in a good way. I had just never seen it. I didn't know that women could preach, would be allowed to preach. And seeing her just really expanded my territory in terms of thinking, in terms of how I viewed church, how I viewed ministry. And of course, I cried that whole week for some strange reason. And I remembered John Bryant saying to me, when I explained to him what I was going through emotionally, he said, "You sure you're not called to preach?" I said, "No," because I never knew women could be called to preach. Right. But that was kind of the beginning. And then other women preachers were there and began to function in ministry. So it was there that I was able to normalize and to accept the reality that women were called and accepted as ministers of the gospel.
Wow. So that led you to seminary now, or that was after?
No. So while I was at St. Paul, what was birthed in me were a couple of things. One, for the first time in my life, I was worshiping there in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with students who were from the Apostolic Church, the Church of God in Christ, the Baptist Church, the A.M.E. Church, the Episcopal Church. We all had just kind of converged on St. Paul. That was new to me because I had only worshiped with Baptists. Right. And so to be in a church, singing in a choir and moving around with males and females from various denominations was new. And it kind of opened my eyes to the reality that to do ministry, there has to be a kind of acceptance, even though there may be some differences in doctrine. There had to be some kind of ability and desire to be together, regardless of, you believe in Jesus only, and I believe, you got to be baptized by the hands of a Baptist preacher. But all of that just went out of the window. We were singing in the choir, we were doing ministry together. And so that St. Paul experience birthed that understanding to me. But the other thing, of course, is that being at St. Paul and being in the ministry, under the ministry of Cecilia Bryant, women's ministry, she planted a seed in me that church had to be, for women, had to be about more than one day. And that's Women's Day. So workshops, times that women would come together, single women, and then married women, and then women who were students, and then women who were single mothers. Seeing her minister to those various demographics within the congregation was really life-changing for me, because I had only viewed women as those who came to church, sang in the choir, and had Women's Day. And so just coming to the reality that women needed ministry that was targeted for their realities. Right. And so that really did, that became a part of who I was and who I wanted to be. So when I met and married Floyd, when he got the appointment to come to Allen, I had a vision for who I could be and what church could be that I would not have had I come directly from St. Jude. Right. So that St. Paul experience certainly broadened my perspective on ministry.
Okay. So I'm going to track your own process in terms of,
ministry?
Yeah,
right.
Seminary, ordination,
Okay, so when we got to New York, I became a partner with Floyd because he wanted to do the, the community revival, and he would say things like, we need, to raise certain amounts of money because I want to buy those stores, I want to do this. So I partnered with him in that. And by this time I had met not only Cecilia, but I had met Renita Weems there at St. Paul. And then in subsequent years, when Renita went to seminary, I met Prathia Hall, Wynn, and other women in ministry. Some of my friends, Jessica Ingram, Joanne Browning, they were all in ministry, but I had said, nah, I don't think so. But finally, one day, I decided and I accepted the reality that that's where God was calling me. Now, understand this. By this time, I had 4 children. So the idea of going to seminary was like, have you lost your mind? Because they were, I think my youngest was like 3. So, but Floyd said, oh yeah, we can do it, you can do it. And so I enrolled in Union Seminary. One of the things that really prompted me, I think, to make that move was we had become friends with Dr. Jim Forbes. And he somehow I just felt that if I were going to go to seminary, if I was going to go to Union, I needed to hurry up because I just felt that Jim was kind of going off in another direction. So Dr. Forbes was kind of the motivator that made me say, the motivation that made me say, go in and do it if you're going to do it. So I ended up going to Union part-time. I could only take 1-2 classes at a time. So my journey was long and hard because I was still parenting, still doing women's conferences, still doing the church thing. So Jim Forbes was my, then I met Jim Washington. I had Jim Washington's class. And then, of course, Dolores Williams came along at one point, and I was able to connect with her and delve into womanist theology, which really became a part of who I was and who I wanted to be. And so my seminary experience was rich, it was protracted, it was long, and I feel that I didn't, because I was doing so much, because I had young children, because I was still doing ministry, still employed by the church at the school, the Allen Christian School at that time. I just sometimes feel like I didn't get everything out of seminary that I could have gotten had I been a young student going in, and was able to devote as much time that would have been more beneficial, for me. But I managed to get through. I did manage to get through with the help of friends, with the help of my husband, and with the help of teachers and Jim Cone, I can't forget him, who understood my reality but they didn't give me any slack. They didn't cut me any slack, but they just knew how difficult it must have been. So I accepted the call to preach around 83, 84, I think, and it was a difficult journey, preparing sermons with 4 young children, but we made it through.
Yeah. So talk to me about your preaching. How would you categorize your preaching?
Well, I take the preaching moment very seriously. And because I do take it very seriously, I find myself probably devoting more time than most to sermon prep. And I say that because I've heard people say they can write a sermon in one day. It would take me 3 or 4 days to write a sermon, and then I'm pushing print during the sermonic selection. So yeah, for me, it's just ever evolving. I love preaching. I've always loved Black preaching from the time I was a child. So there were just so many folk that I just admired so in ministry. And so I wanted to, of course, have my own voice, but I just wanted to try to do it as best I could.
So tell me preaching mentors, and then
Wow. Well, of course, I would have to say going back to the Memphis experience, my pastors, one was Reverend Mosby, William H. Mosby, one was Reverend L.J. Peppers. They were just guys who could preach, and that's who I grew up with. I think the Bryants would be, I would consider mentors, though their styles were totally different. John Bryant just masters the simplicity of the gospel, and Cecilia was deep and wonderful, but they both inspired me in their own ways. Floyd, because Floyd was excellent at interpreting the times. He read the newspaper, like 4 newspapers every day, even before he went to Congress. And so he was just great at that social gospel, that social justice, that economic analysis, the political analysis, and where black folks should be looking and what black folks should be doing. And so he certainly contributed to shaping who I became in ministry. And then, of course, as I went into ministry, Claudette Copeland was my friend, and I was awed by her ability to say it, and she said it so differently from everyone else. Renita was one of my best friends, and there was something about her preaching that struck me. So I was surrounded by great folk, and those would be the ones. Jackie McCullough was a preacher that I met when I got to New York. And I was in awe of her because she was the first one who really went on that praise and worship thing and introduced that dynamic to ministry for me. So I guess those would be the ones that in my earlier years. And I've just continued to meet and to appreciate the styles of so many that I have met since then. They wouldn't be my mentors, because I'm older than many of them, but they have mentored me in different ways, Yeah.
So let's go back to my question again. So how would you characterize
my preaching?
Yeah, narrative, expository, even if those categories fit, they may not even fit. Oh
boy. I think I could be a little of both, depending on the text. I love the stories, to tell the story of the bent over woman, or the man with the withered hand, or David as he's running from Saul. So that I really like that, but then I can be very expository too. If I'm preaching about David, and if I'm preaching one of the Psalms, I'm going to go verse by verse, and and try to do that justice. I want to be, one thing Jim Forbes taught us was to just be true to the text, and so that's what I strive to do. Just be as true to the text as I can be. That's why I'm constantly reading and going through commentaries, because I want to do the best that I can do to present Jesus to the congregation.
Would you consider yourself operating out of a womanist homiletic?
Absolutely.
So tell me now how you define a womanist homiletic.
Okay, so when I went to seminary, and Jim Cone gave us, we were systematic theology. So we went through black theology, we went through Asian theology, and when we got to womanist theology, there were really no books. What he gave us were some excerpts from Dolores Williams. I don't remember if it was her thesis or her dissertation. And one of the definitions of womanist theology was that a womanist certainly affirmed herself, but, and this is probably not as accurate as I would want it to be, but a womanist theologian cared about her community, cared about her men and her children. And of course, by this time, I'm married with children. And so that kind of struck me, because there was something about feminist theology that I understood, but I always felt that feminist theology did not speak to me, because I grew up in Memphis, and white women were my oppressors in so many ways, in the department stores, or the insurance people, the way they would talk down. So there was just something that I just couldn't resonate totally with feminist theology. But Lord, that womanist theology, it just hit me. And I will say this, once I heard Cecilia Bryant talk about Hagar and present Hagar in a light that I had never seen as being a surrogate mother. And then, of course, when I read about it with Dolores Williams. I said, okay, I got this. We're supposed to look for something in the text that men don't necessarily see and that white women don't necessarily see or affirm. And that's the way I began to look at the biblical text from the eyes of with the eyes of my experiences in America. And so when I read about Job's wife, I could not demonize her. Because, having gone through my own struggles and stuff, I can understand how a woman would look at her experience and be so torn, so overwhelmed, that there would be days that she would say, maybe I just need to curse God and die in you too. So you look at the text experientially, right, and not so much the way other people look at it. Yeah. You find yourself in the text.
Right,
yes.
So you're not looking with eyes of judgment.
Right.
To understand this.
Hagar was abused. I mean, the way she was treated. But I had heard Hagar not so much demonized, but maybe trivialized. Yeah. She wasn't the promise. Sarah was the promise. Isaac was the promise, not Ishmael. But then to really think about her story and to think about the fact that this woman was used, she was cast away, but she still survived. Yeah, so I do look at the text and hope to find myself in the text and other women of color and men of color in the text, because I think it's so important.
So you had one of the first books in Womanist.
I did.
So tell us about that, and I want to make sure we get the name of the book so people can read it. It is one of the prime. Go ahead.
Dolores Williams could not get rid of me. I just clung to her as much as I could. So when I got ready to do my thesis, of course, I went to Dolores and asked her to please be my advisor. And I explained to her that I wanted to do something on preaching healing to hurting women. And she said, okay. And so with, the papers that I had written with Jim Cone, the papers that I had done for Forbes and for Dolores, we just kind of all put them together. I thank God for Renita Weems, who told me, Flake, you're getting ready to go to seminary. You got to get a computer. She said, so I bought a computer. I couldn't imagine how I was going to I would wake Renita up at 3 a.m. in the morning sometime and say, Doc, I don't think I was calling her Doc then, but I was saying, Renita, I just lost my paper. I don't know what to do. And she would get up and she would walk me through it. But I was able to combine those papers and, really write that thesis. And Dolores Williams was there reading with me, chastising me, instructing me. So that was it was a good experience for me to write that thesis. Yeah. And of course, when Jim Cone said to me, well, you got to turn this into a book. And so that's what I did eventually, preaching healing to hurting women, God in her midst.
Wow, I remember. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we still refer to it in the PhD program because, we have
that's good.
quite a few womanists in the program.
Right, and for me, just thinking about that whole seminary experience, my soul looks back to wonder how I got over, but I know that it was that womanist theology that pushed me. I was so intrigued by it, and so I so identified with it. Yeah.
So, tell me now about your pastoral experience, because you moved from that to co-pastor to pastor to retire. Right. So tell me about what it was like pastoring as a womanist?
By myself or with Floyd? Well, the co-pastor thing was it was good in that, you know, Floyd was in Congress and moving around, so I got probably more pastoral experience than many, perhaps, because he was gone. So I had the staff meetings and I did the day-to-day run of the church, and we kind of had an unspoken rule. He would take care of the politics, he would take care of the development side, the community stuff, but I would kind of be there for the day-to-day run of the church. I'm sure that for the co-pastors in the land, everybody's model is different, but that was my model because Floyd was always moving. So I enjoyed it. It was fun to kind of just set it up and help him carry out that vision for community development and for other things. If I could relieve him of some of that responsibility, I wanted to do it. Yes. Floyd was a great husband, is a great husband, and was a great father. So that in the midst of everything that he did, he was always there for us. He went to the grocery store, he cooked, he did all of those things. So I just made up in my mind, because he was so present at home, that I was going to be present in the church. And so we could have that kind of partnership. And my role was to really kind of take care of the local church. And so when he appointed me, he called me co-pastor himself. And then when Bishop Greg Ingram came, he gave me the official role appointment as a co-pastor. And people said, what changed? I said, nothing. Nothing really changed except that piece of paper, because I did what I was always doing. And almost as Floyd retired in 2021, and Bishop Ingram gave me the appointment as pastor, that was an interesting time, but you know, and I wasn't sure if I should have done it, if I should have said yes, or if I should have pursued this whole title of pastor. But considering that the pandemic came, and I was there to be able to take the church through the pandemic, it just lets me know that was God's plan. And so it was a good 4 years. You know, we were able, after I came out of the fetal position, when they closed the church down, I said, Lord, what are we going to do? Because I was one who believed that Sunday morning attendance was just pivotal. You know, I mean, it was crucial. Right. So, yeah. Once I got over that, you know, we got on great. We've got to make this work. We've got to make this work. And thank God it worked. You know, the church remained relatively strong. We used to have 3 services pre-pandemic, 6:30, 8:30, and 11:15. But, you know, we came back with one, and then we added the second one. And I told God the next pastor would have to have the 6:30 a.m. Because I didn't want to do that again. But it was a good run. You know, the people knew me, and they were happy, I think, for me to be there to take them through the pandemic. And it was an experience in which I truly got to know God better. Yeah.
So tell me about retirement now. So what are some of the things that you're doing in retirement? Well, interestingly enough, retirement has been rewarding. Mm-hmm. I don't miss pastoring. Mm-hmm. I miss the people, but I don't miss pastoring. I don't miss having to get up, having to write 2 sermons weekly, because that's what I did. You know, Floyd, following his model, he always preached different sermons. So I don't miss that.
And I'm excited because I've been on the road quite a bit. I told somebody this is the first time I've reached diamond medallion status with Delta in a long time. So I've been moving around since June, and I'm just kind of enjoying it. I really am. I am grateful that folks still invite me to preach, and I am grateful that I still want to.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I know you may not want to be called mother, but you are a mentor to many, right?
Yeah.
So let's say that we won't say mother. We'll say.
Listen, I preached the elder statesman sermon at Hampton, so I had to accept the reality. When I got that invitation, I said, whoa, this is like, really? Right. Elder statesman? And so I had to accept the reality. You're 70 years old, yes. So you can call me mother, grandmother, I don't care.
So you're obviously a mother, mentor, grandmother, mother to many. So what has that been like? I just did an interview with Buster Sores, and we were off camera talking about how we used to look up to Gardner Taylor and Dr. Proctor and all these folks.
Oh yeah.
And say, now we's them people. People looking at like, I ain't that old, but but we are. So what is it like to be regarded, I guess, elders? It's elder status is really what it is.
Right. Well, for me, you know what? On one level, it is humbling, and I'm awed by it because I never ever even thought about people considering me like that, And so when people say it, I'm still awed by it because my mentors, the people that I looked up to were such great pastors and great preachers. And so it is humbling to me. But one of the things that I've always done is just loved young people. I did teach in junior high school for a few years. So when I see talent and when I see the oil flowing in the lives of people, there's just something in me that wants to partner with them as they move through ministry. And so if I can give them an opportunity, if I could give them an opportunity to preach at Allen, I would. If I could recommend them to friends, I would do that because I'm a firm believer that the gifts are for the kingdom. Yeah. And so if there is a gift that comes to my attention, then I just feel that that's what we should do. We should promote, we should celebrate, we should support, especially younger voices. And I guess maybe that comes out of the fact that I had 4 young people, none of them are preachers, but you would want someone to mentor them, to help them. And so I felt that that was something that I could do. We could do as a church, as a congregation. So I just love to see young people, young preachers evolve.
Right. So tell me what you think about the state of preaching today.
Oh boy. I think that there are some great preachers. And I think that there are some who don't do preaching justice. I think that there are some who've gone off in the wrong direction. They have made a decision to do and to treat the gospel in a way that would probably be offensive to some of the other ones that we looked up to Proctor and to Gardner Taylor and to Prathia. So I think the challenge of ministry is to try to be relevant but also to really pastor and preach with integrity. Yeah. Don't make promises for God. That's true. To the degree, if you stand in this line, God's going to do this. God's going to bless you. If you turn around 3 times, God's going to, open a new door. That is painful for me because you're giving people, well, you're not telling the truth. Right. So let's teach relationship. Let's preach relationship. Let's preach the reality of a God that blesses, but also a God that carries us through our difficult moments. We want to equip our hearers to have good days and bad days. Yeah. And we want to equip our children to understand that trouble comes and things happen, but God is still God, and there has to be a relationship, and it cannot be a gimme, gimme, gimme relationship. It's got to be a relationship that says, I trust you, God. You are sovereign. You are the king of the throne, on the throne of my heart. Yeah, so I'm troubled by some preaching, and I'm just delighted at some of the other young folk voices that are really preaching with that integrity and that character that I think exemplifies who God would have us be, even in this hour.
Yeah, yeah. Well, from my thoughts, I don't think that we pay enough attention to the absence of God or the experience of the absence of God. Of course, Rita Weems wrote a book on this, that
Listening for God.
Yeah, that just kind of, and was really honest about that. And I think that it's hard for us to be honest about that.
Yeah, we think that's a blasphemy.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And we also have to deal with nuance, which means we got to listen and wait a minute. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, we're not popping up, and right. And I got anything against popping up. As I've gotten older and had more and more life experience, I can own what Renita wrote mm-hmm. about, which was there are times when we experience the absence of God. Now, I believe the absence is a precursor, or mm-hmm. My own experience of it is if I stay in the process, that God shows up in some ways that might be painful, right. with some insight mm-hmm. about a relationship I need to correct, or some thought that I did not want to think, or
right.
some
exactly.
Right. Mm-hmm. But we don't talk enough about that.
Right, because I think there is a sense in the minds of some people that is blasphemous and that is not acceptable. But somebody taught me, and can't say who it was, but it may be a number of us, a number of you. We've just concluded that God can handle our pain, our anger, our frustration, our questions. And, I've been through situations where I preach Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? Exactly. Because you feel forsaken. Exactly. You feel like God played a trick. This election, how much prayer lines and prayers daily and nightly, folk were praying hard and just believing that God was going to do it. And then when you wake up on Wednesday morning and God didn't do it, okay, so do you just say, oh, well, it's okay. It's not okay for some of us. Now, we're still angry and still frustrated and still asking God what happened and why. Mm-hmm. Why did you allow it? I don't believe it's your will, God, but I trust you, and that's kind of where people are. We still got to get through it. And somehow I think we believe that we will, but I think there may be a price that we have to pay that we don't really want to pay. But we do have to take ownership. And every sermon that I listened to in the last 3 or 4 days people have been, these preachers have been clear. Yeah, I ain't happy.
Right. One of the things that James Baldwin says is, in times of extreme difficulty, consult the ancestors. So I'm playing Gardner Taylor, Howard Thurman, Prathia. I'm playing, and I'm listening to the contemporary folks.
That's interesting, because I've been moving, I moved from Curtis to Howard John to Gina. I listened to all those sermons for Sunday, the Sunday after the election, just to kind of get my, and I was so glad I didn't have to preach. I was so glad I didn't have to preach. But that's an interesting thing, listening to the ancestors, yeah.
The volume, I listened to Gardner, he did a It Is Finished sermon. I listened to it, the election was Tuesday, Wednesday. I listened to it Thursday morning, last Thursday morning. And even though he didn't address that particular subject, the sermon was broad enough that
it was broad enough.
That's the
exactly.
That's what I'm longing for. That our preaching is broad enough. Fred Craddock tells
to transcend seasons and to transcend the years.
Right.
That a sermon that you preached in the 60s can still be relevant and still touch the hearts of those who hear you in 2024.
Right.
That's amazing.
So for example, Fred Craddock says that he was on a panel. You remember when the Gardner Taylor Institute was? Remember that? You probably came. All of us came. Matter of fact, I was on a doggone panel, right? And I said, "Come on, y'all." I said, "Look, y'all put me in front. I don't need to be in late because I get hit by one of these big trains." Anyway,
right.
some of them with Craddock and Forbes and all that craziness. It's just I didn't need to be there. At any rate, Fred Craddock tells the story of he was scheduled to preach, and as they were introducing him, the night that Martin Luther King was killed, the person ran in and said there was a note that they read that Dr. King has been killed in Memphis. And he said he didn't think his sermon was big enough, so they held hands and prayed.
Right.
He said the night that the bombs fell from President Bush 1 in Iraq, Gardner Taylor was being introduced, and the note came into the pulpit, and they announced that the bombs are falling in Iraq. And he said, Gardner Taylor went on and preached, but his sermon was broad enough to encompass the occasion, even though, and he said this about Gardner Taylor, he said, my sermon wasn't big enough, but his sermons are big enough, and Howard Thurman, the stuff is big enough, it's big enough, it's deep enough, it's grounded in text and experience and old wisdom, and so it's like the ancestors are speaking. With Gardner Taylor in particular, I don't know if it's down in that swamp somewhere in Louisiana.
Well, yeah, because I did look at his book not too long ago. Well, it's not, it was before the election, but the Jesus and the Disinherited, I mean, it's just like, it's rich. It's rich.
So let me say, Otis Mars, I'm saying, this is your interview. I'm supposed to be asking questions, but you're a great conversation partner, right? So Otis Mars Jr. said, we attribute one strand of, we attribute liberation theology to James Cone, but he says there's some liberation theology older than Cone. He says Jesus and the Disinherited, and he's exactly right.
I hadn't even thought about that.
Until he said I hadn't thought about it either. He is exactly right. Now it's a little bit different strand, right? You got to say that, but Jesus and the Disinherited. I mean that will blow you. I mean it blows me away because it's just like. It's broader. That's the only word I can say.
Right. I mean, it's when you think about it, it's right up there with Cone, with the oppressed. God
of the oppressed. It encompasses
the disinherited, the oppressed. Yes, I had not thought about that, but he's right.
I'm going to say this, and then I'll shut up and give it back to you. Toni Morrison said at the funeral of James Baldwin, he said, he gave us a language to dwell in. And it was so, I forget the adjective, close, that we thought it was our language. Mm-hmm. So these preachers, we have feelings that we can't name.
Right.
And the preacher names it and gives us a language. And maybe that's what the text is about. Maybe that's why the text has lived all these thousands of years, right?
Right.
We have feelings and experiences that we can't name, but we read the text. So the psalmist says, my God, why have you? And it gives us a language to dwell in, to feel, to dialogue with. So that's the kind of preaching I'm looking for now. And we got some amazing preachers. I mean, there's some amazing preaching going on. There's also some, as you said, some not so amazing preaching, that's going on. But over the whole, this tradition of African American preaching, I don't think there's anything like it. I just don't think it's...
Especially when you take ownership of your experience. And to say, I was hurt, I was in pain, to say that I still trust God, but I had to get a divorce. To be able to invite God into your experience and be comfortable enough to tell people, to tell listeners that I'm not always so strong. I'm not always so clear about my future. I have fears, I have anxieties, I have anger, and try not to be bitter. Mm-hmm. Right. And so when you take ownership of your emotions, I think it helps others to take ownership, and the listeners, the congregants, to take ownership of their emotions. And that's healthy. Because in so many ways, the spirituality of, I'll even say our foreparents, was not always healthy. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think being in 2024, there's been such a great evolution in the church to accept the pain of other people and not condemn them for being angry or asking questions. I often think about my father and many of our fathers who were in the First War. And when 1945, when the war ended, they were brought back and forced to assimilate into a world that didn't have an idea of what they had been through. And I think about the fact that my father himself, who had some drinking issues, probably had post-traumatic stress disorder, but it was not named. And so many of his colleagues or many of the men who had been to the war, they were left to deal with what they had seen and what they had experienced. The church had no idea, the world had no idea, and they were left to languish
alone. That's one of my definitions of trauma. That which you have to deal with. It's a difficult experience that you have to deal with alone.
Alone, and you're not given permission to grieve, certainly not lament. Yeah. So they drank. They drank. That's the only escape they had.
Wow. So the profundity of that in the preaching moment opens up a lane for a whole lot of people to look at it slightly differently. Right. I mean, you twist a little bit. and it's like maybe forgiveness might be possible.
Exactly.
You know, because you were able to look that deep into it and come to that's the kind of preacher I'm talking about.
Right. You have to be able to forgive. You are able to forgive. When you see some of the people that you have issues with as human beings. My father was not a loving, outgoing, huggy kind of dad. He was stern, very aloof. But the reality is I could forgive him because I saw where he came from. I knew his story. And I understood that life for him had not been a crystal stair. My father had to flee from Mississippi because his brother had done something to, I don't know if his brother had hugged, whistled at, or whatever, but they had to get out of town. They had to get out of Dodge, And so because my father had the life that he had, I saw that he did not have the capacity to be the father I might have wanted. But he worked hard, and he came home, and he was there. He didn't talk much, and sometimes he was too gruff. But when I thought about what he had been through, that was my daddy.
Yeah.
That was my daddy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So these are the kinds of, but see, that's in the kind of soul searching. That's in the kind of, these are, for me, sermons, for example, that come out of one's devotional life.
Right.
Versus
that. And then when you think about one of the issues that we have dealt with of late is this whole issue of sexual abuse. Leaving Absalom's house, so many women have, I've heard women, preachers and men preach that sermon now, but that sermon would have been taboo 40 years ago. And in some churches now, that would be almost heretical. But just think about the women. I did a retreat, a conference some years ago, and I talked about sexual abuse and how we have to acknowledge the pain, but somehow move beyond it, because you can't get stuck there. You can't get stuck in that experience or those experiences. And a woman came up to me who was 90 years old and said to me, "I have never told anyone, but what you talked about was done to me." She couldn't name it. She just said, "What you talked about was done to me." Wow. But I never told anybody. Wow. And so she's been in church all of her life, but never was healed in that area. And so, of course, you hug her and cry with her for a minute. But, church has to be that place where people can really hear their experience and then experience God.
Right. So for my last question, I'm going to give you whatever you'd like to say to the nation, to the black church, to women, to men, given that we are in the throes of just white supremacy ensconced with carte blanche in essence. And so I know that you've been thinking and feeling, and so anything you would like to say, I don't want to put you on the spot necessarily any more than I already have. But what would you like to say to us
I think what I'd like to say is that the church, the black church, has to take seriously again and more widespreadly, that's not a word, but you know what I'm saying. I think we have to remember that we are God's gift to humanity, the church. And as the black church, I would say we are God's gift to our community. We should see ourselves that way. Stop seeing ministry as a place of self-gratification, you know, branding and all of the things that so many of the young people are into. This is so much bigger than you're making a name for yourself. This is so much bigger than your post and having your followers. The time that we're in now, and for the next 4 years, God only knows what will happen. The church has to be that place where people come to be healed, come to have their minds regulated and their hearts spoken to, because we can't play those games that I see so many playing now. It's not about you. Mm-hmm. It's about the community. It's about what people are going through. It's not about you know, your likes and you know, the pictures that you take walking into the sanctuary, you know, that kind of thing. Listen, this thing is so much bigger than that. It's so much bigger than you. People are dying. People don't know what's going to happen. Our kids are still young men are still being racially profiled. People need a solid word. They need to see Jesus. They need to meet Jesus where they are. And so we cannot be those who just have gotten on the bandwagon, this new wave, you know, needing adjutants everywhere you go. Gotta have security, gotta have this. Listen, it's so much bigger than that. It's so much bigger than that. Wake up and see social justice is where we must be, but we must also remind people who they are and who they can be in God and who God can be to them. And even though we go through these difficult George Floyd moments, and we go through the Breonna Taylor moments, and we go through the elections that break our hearts, there's still got to be a church that we can offer to our people that says that you'll get through this too.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming all of this way to share this wisdom. We are excited we're going to share this broadly and widely. And just thank you for who you are. Thank you for the years of relationship. Thank you for always being someone I could look up to, someone that could trust, someone that could share, someone that could talk, you know. So you carry a beautiful presence.
Thank you so much. It has been great. Great being here.